Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 14th of June, 2017, and today we have a question and answer session, so let's take a look at our questions here. First up from Greg Palmer. Hey Curtis, any recommendations for boom shock mounts that are lightweight but effective at damping the boom handling noise? I've been using the RA DUSM1 and the Rode SM3 shock mounts with my Rode NTG 3 shotgun for booming. Both seem to transfer quite a bit of boom handling noise to the mic. I know Rycote has their Lyre mount as an alternative. Any opinion on the effectiveness of the Lyre suspension compared to conventional banding method? Thanks so much, Greg. Greg, that's a fine question. Let's take a look here. So this is the RA DUSM1, which is this has sort of the rubberized the bands connected to a ring, and you insert the mic here. I actually have one of those as well. Haven't used it for years and years and years, but that was my first shock mount actually. And then this is the SM3R. I don't know if that's the exact same one you have. I suspect not. I think this is the Rycote version, and you may have an earlier version. I have two shock mounts that I use primarily today. I have a Rycote medium hole softy Lyre mount and pistol grip. When I'm booming indoors, I'll typically use this. And then I also have the Rycote Cyclone Windshield kit, which comes with its own shock mount, which I'll typically use when I'm outdoors using the Cyclone wind cover. So I have had really good luck with these. I have not had a lot of boom handling noise transfer to the microphone capsule when using the Rycote system with Lyre. I did test some other shock mounts that use sort of the more rubber band type of suspension method in the boom microphone review comparison that we did probably almost a year, maybe a little over a year ago. And I did find that some of those did not isolate the boom pole from the microphone capsule as well. So yeah, I definitely have had very good luck with the Rycote Lyre system. So there are two main things I think that can kind of tend to transfer noise to the capsule when you've got it up on a boom pole. Number one is actually the handling noise on the pole itself. So if you are cueing back and forth, there are a variety of methods. Some people use white cotton gloves. I do have some of those. That didn't work great for me, but that's an option some people use. Some people just, kind of have the pole just resting here and kind of cue back and forth. I've seen that as well. I have a tendency to twist my wrists. I don't know if that's good or bad, kind of my arm and my wrist. And that's worked pretty well for me because that way I'm not creating any friction on the pole with my hands. The other thing, of course, is the cable. So whether the cable's internal coiled or external and wrapped around the pole, obviously you'll want to do some things there. I think you've got a good handle on all that stuff, of course. But yes, I've had very good luck with the Lyre system, so hopefully that gives you some insights there. Thanks for that question. Next up is Nick Laws. Hey Curtis, I'm going to be filming a comedy show, and I wonder if you have any advice about mixing the audience laughter with the comedian's voice. Okay. Feel like we're going back to a 70s sitcom or an 80s sitcom. And that's cool. This is a great question. So unless you advise otherwise, I'll be recording a feed straight from the comedian's mic and probably two or more audience mics. I've never done this type of recording before, so I'm not sure which type of mics will be best for this or where to put them. Right now, I have a couple of AKG C1000 hypercardioid mics that I was thinking of putting on stands in front of the stage pointed at the audience. I also have the built-in mics from my Tascam DR70D that might work for this type of thing pretty well. In post, what would be the best and most efficient way to mix this? Okay, well, actually, let's stop there. Let's talk first about miking the live comedy show. So, I think recording the comedian's mic, first of all, to one channel, and then recording the audience to either one or two additional separate channels is a great strategy. I think the biggest thing you're going to need to consider is where to place those mics and what type of mics to use to mic the audience. You're going to have to be careful about feedback. I think this is because you're doing some live sound reinforcement, it sounds like. You're going to want to be careful about what kind of mics you use to record the audience and the direction in which they're pointed. If you are, I would probably recommend cardioid instead of hypercardioid, because then you don't have any of the tails or the stuff on the back that could potentially be picking up stuff from the speakers. And then, of course, you're going to want to position them. So you're going to want the null part of the polar pattern on the cardioid mics. That is the part that doesn't pick up any sound, the back of the mic. Positioned so that those microphones are not picking up the sound that are coming out of the loudspeakers. So whatever way that works for the particular setup you guys are using, that's one thing to keep in mind too. I think using a couple of mics on the audience is a great option. Even the Tascam DR70D mics, they're not as high quality as the AKGs most likely, but those would do the job as well. And I believe those are cardioid. So as long as you have that in the right position, I think that should work fine. Again, you don't want the sound, if you are reinforcing the sound live, you don't want that sound getting into those mics as much if you can avoid it. Because I imagine there are going to be times when the comedian will be talking and the audience will be laughing as well. So those are some things to think about there. Then you ask in post, what would be the best and most efficient way to mix this? Obviously, I want to be able to hear the audience laughter, but I don't want the comedian's voice to be muddied up by the sound from the PA. Okay, so you are using a PA system. My first thought is just ride the faders and lower the audience mic level when the comedian starts talking, but I'm hoping there is a way to do this, maybe compression to make it sound more natural. I'm using Adobe Premiere and Audition. Well, I think riding the fader is the absolute right thing to do, and I think you can make it sound entirely natural. Here's a little fader controller I got recently called the FaderPort by Presonus, and I think in post that riding the fader and really, you only want the audience laughter when you want the audience laughter. So I think there's nothing wrong with riding the fader, doing a few passes over the audience laughter tracks in post, and fade those down as soon as you want the comedian's voice to be the main thing. Fade them up when you want to capture the sound. And you can also do multiple passes. So if you don't get the fader ride just right on the first round, you can always go back and using the touch setting to modify the fader adjustments you've already made. You can just sort of tweak it and get it to exactly how you want it. And I think it'll sound very natural. If you try using compression or something else like that, I don't think that's going to work well. You could use a gate, but I generally don't find those to sound as natural as riding the fader. So I think really riding the fader is the right thing to do, probably the best thing to do. It's a little bit more time consuming, but I think within one or two passes, you should be able to get it dialed in pretty well, so it shouldn't take too terribly long. And it will be even faster if you can do it with a controller, something like that. So good luck, Nick. That sounds like a fun time, and I wish you the best on that production there. So, thanks for the question. Okay, next up, Kevin Edwards. Hi, Curtis. I've been doing sound for a small film club for a couple of years, and I have all the lower to mid-end equipment, Zoom F8, sound devices, Sennheiser, etc. But this year I'm looking to getting a budget camera. I'm considering the Panasonic FX2500, or in the USA it's called the FX2000. But my question is, do you have any other suggestions? I've already purchased a carbon tripod and small carbon crane, but I find I keep holding back on the camera, needing to really understand what features are more important to me. I actually asked him, I responded to him and asked him to provide a little bit more detail about what he'll be shooting, and he came back with this. Thank you for your response. I'm looking for a low-cost option on which to do B-roll. This is part of the club I belong to. We are an amateur group from diverse backgrounds, and most of our shoots are predominantly planned projects with lighting used to supplement natural light, so low light capability is not so important, but portability and picture quality is. Once again, thank you for your advice, which is greatly valued. Kind regards. Okay, Kevin, let's have a look here really quickly. So Kevin, one thing I will confess, I'm not very familiar. I think that's a camcorder model, but I'm not sure. I wasn't able to find it. I did a little Googling really quickly. Not familiar with that particular model. I assume it's a camcorder with a fixed lens. I think that can be a fine choice. I have a tendency to prefer larger sensor cameras. So even if they are things like here, we have the Panasonic Lumix G7, which is an interchangeable lens hybrid camera. So really it's made for both video and still photography. But the thing that's really nice about it is it shoots 4K. It has a larger sensor than many of the camcorders do, even the professional camcorders, which I think gives better picture quality and does better in low light. And I understand you're going to be lighting most things, so that's not going to be an issue for you. But I think the larger sensor aesthetic is, from my point of view, I prefer the look of that. That's just a personal preference. So I should say, first of all, we're talking about cameras, so this is camera advice for audio guys. But all I can really share with you are my own personal biases and based on what I've used and worked with. So that's something. There are a number of Sonys that also have very, very good image quality. The Sony Alpha 6000 is a HD shooting. I guess also you didn't say whether you need HD or 4K. If you only need HD, the Alpha 6000 is also definitely an option. Let's just show you that here really quickly. So for example, here with the 16 to 50 millimeter kit lens, the Alpha 6000 comes in at about $600 US. I don't like This is a personal bias. There are lots of people that love the Sony cameras. Lots of people are producing great imagery with the Sony cameras. I personally don't like a couple of things about them. They're not bad cameras. They're just things that don't work well for my personal workflow. Number one, the batteries are very small, so you're switching out batteries a lot. I find that to be a little bit of a nuisance. I didn't particularly like the ergonomics on these as well. They're made to be super small. But what that means in general terms is they don't have as many physical controls, so you spend more time in the menu, and I found the menu system on the Sonys to be a little bit fiddly. I know some people are going to be angry when they hear that because they'll disagree with me. That's fine. Everyone's subject, is welcome to their own opinion. I'm just not a huge fan of that. I prefer the Panasonics a little bit more. The G7 does shoot 4K. It does decently up to about ISO 1600-ish, maybe as far as 3200, so that should be plenty for any situation that's lit. And even when it's lit, you generally won't have to go above 800, has been my experience, depending on what you're doing. But I've been really pleased with the picture quality that comes out of the Panasonics. So that's my own personal opinion. I have to confess I don't know very much at all about the fixed lens cameras from Panasonic, and especially the camcorders. I just don't know much about them, so I really not in a position to give a lot of advice on that. But if it's looking like it has the feature set you want, then go find some reviews out on the internet and see what kind of imagery they're able to produce with them. If it looks good to you, then it could be a great option for you. So sorry I don't have something more definitive there, but hopefully that helps a little bit. And thanks for the question. All right, next up from John McClure. Hello, Curtis. There's a YouTube video that you posted on May 27th, 2017 called Sound Devices Mix Pre 6 Initial Impressions. Yes. Just incidental to that, I am planning to do the final review of the Mix Pre 6 next week on my main channel. If you're interested in the new recorders and audio interfaces from Sound Devices. At the 15-minute mark in the video, you explain how the HDMI timecode in port on the Mix Pre 6 can be connected to your Panasonic GH5, taking advantage of timecode as a way to stamp picture and sound with the timecode for later syncing during editing. Heretofore, you have advocated syncing sound and picture by simply clapping, or using an inexpensive production slate to create a sharp clacking noise. With your experimentation of the timecode link between the Mix Pre 6 and the GH5, do you envision a point in the future where sound syncing will get away from the clapping method of sync and shift toward timecode? Fine question. We're going to pause there. It all depends on the production. If you're just doing your own little stuff that's self-funded, that you're not getting paid for, I think that slating or clapping is it's a fine approach. It works. Where it starts to become a little tedious is when you have a lot of footage and a lot of audio clips to sync up. And that's where the more automated means of syncing really come in and help. It's especially why they're used on productions that have a budget, because for them, time is money. So if the less time they spend in post syncing video clips with audio clips, the better. So using timecode definitely is something that's used more. Now, I want to make a clarification here as far as budget productions versus no budget productions. There are small budgets. There are, there's this whole kind of array of different types of productions. If you're just doing a passion project and you're going to have, fewer than 100 clips, then doing it manually can be just a perfectly fine way of doing it. And typically, up until fairly recently, within the last year or so, that's just how I did it. I either had people clap or I used a slate and synced them up. Once you start getting beyond that, it starts getting a little bit mind-numbing to try and sync all that up. So I have invested in timecode gear at this point, so I do use timecode on the bigger projects. On the smaller projects, it's still just not, I just still don't use it, just because it's just as easy to have the talent either clap or slate in. If I know, for example, on a lot of these small corporate pieces, I'm doing the main storyline, which is usually going to be an interview or talking head type of thing. I'm only going to get maybe 5 or 6 or 8 clips, and that's really easy to sync up. It's no big deal in post. So I'll generally just do that with a slate or a clap. And then I'll have a bunch of B-roll that would be interspersed on top of that. And these are usually pieces that are 5 minutes or shorter, maybe up to 10 minutes at the most, so not a big deal. Now, when you start working on the bigger projects or there's a larger budget, now actually let me take the next step up. So that's sort of the smaller projects. I'm getting paid for those, so that's one thing. But if you're just doing passion projects, those you often fall in the same category, not necessarily. They can be feature length, and at that point you have to make a decision. Are you willing to do all that syncing manually, or do you really, you want to invest the however much money to either go for something like Pluralize, which doesn't require timecode, or do you want to invest in some timecode gear, or do something like what we did with the MixPre there and just feed timecode from the GH5 to the MixPre 6? Lots of different options there. But you have to make that decision yourself depending on what the type of project is you're doing. I have done some professional jobs, freelance jobs, where it was relatively small budget and timecode was not a requirement, so we just slated. And in fact, I was working with a DP who, for whatever reason, I don't know, wanted to keep his camera rig light. He did not want a timecode clock on his camera, so we didn't do timecode. We just slated, and the customer was perfectly happy with that. They handed it off to whoever was doing their post work, and they did not require timecode. They were fine with the slate. So that was a relatively small one. So when I'm talking small budget there, that whole piece, they had put more into it. We were just sort of, we were the kind of the remote crew. We shot, it's funny actually, we shot an interview basically, and we probably had, in the end, we delivered probably 15 clips or something like that. It was a relatively short piece. So the overall finished piece was probably 3.5 minutes long, and we captured all the interview audio and 2-camera picture for that. And then they edited it down. The funny thing is they ended up using more of the audio than they did of the camera work. And so when I say kind of a small budget, in that case, for example, I charged my half-day rate plus the rental of my gear kit. So I think in that case I made $350 or something like that it was probably 2.5 to 3 hours of work. So, that's a small budget project, I would say, for a short film. And then there are much larger. You get up into a $10,000 feature film, which is still very, very, very small budget. And in those cases, they may or may not use timecode. My friend Scott Vanderbilt actually worked on a couple of short films actually recently, actually in a feature film with a director by the name of Noam Kroll, whom some of you may have heard. He actually has a pretty good social media presence. He has a blog and he posts to Premium Beat sometimes, I believe. In any case, he shot some short films for them, and I believe they use timecode even on the short films. And I'm almost positive they use timecode. In fact, I remember seeing the tentacle sync on the camera for the feature film. So, Scott, I hope you don't mind me sharing that. I think Noam actually put that on his blog, so I got the information there. So it just depends. Do I see a future where we don't use slates anymore? Even when they're using timecode on the big budget productions, they're still using slates as backup. They don't want to have to go reshoot anything because that's the most expensive thing you can do. So they are still using slates because a slate is nice because it puts additional information in. So in case anything does go wrong with the timecode, if for some reason the timecode clock drifted or it ran out of battery and you didn't realize it or whatever, and somehow you didn't get timecode, then you also have a slate as backup. So I don't see it necessarily replacing slates on the big budget productions. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Timecode is not infallible. There are still problems, especially as soon as you have an electronic device involved. There's always potential problems. Now, you went on further to ask, as an aside to this question, what's the deal with these $1,500 timecode production slates that I'm seeing on the B&H website? Do the pros actually use those things, or are they a relatively new novelty that hasn't gained traction yet in the marketplace? I definitely don't consider those a novelty. Here's an example here. Ambient Recording has one. Denicky has some. Actually, they have multiple. This has a high-quality timecode generator built into it, so you would sync this to the other clocks, perhaps the one you connect to the camera, the other one that you have either connected to or inside of your pro-level audio recorder mixer. I definitely don't see these as a novelty. They definitely are used in the larger budget productions, and for the independent or kind of freelance location sound mixers. They'll often have one of these in their kit, or they will, potentially rent one. And when they do, they charge the customer more. And the customers, again, want them for the very same reasons that they want to have redundancy with a slate and just regular timecode generators. This provides just another level of protection and to prevent any of the risks of having to reshoot anything. So Are they for us little guys that don't do large budget production work often? Probably not. I don't see a compelling reason for me to buy one of these right now. But if a customer wanted one, I wouldn't have any hesitation renting one and adding that to the rental fee for the kit, which is part of what you normally charge. In addition to your day or half day rate or whatever it may be, you also charge for the kit. And so you didn't negotiate that pricing up front. So so I wouldn't say they haven't gained traction. I just would say that the people working on smaller budget jobs generally are not using them. It's going to be for the larger budget jobs. So thanks for that question, John. Very good. All right, next up is Hans. Hans, my question is regarding podcasting with Facebook Live audio in mind. My friends and I are doing a series of podcasts. I have a Zoom U24 audio interface that I plan to use with my laptop for recording. However, we'd like to incorporate a live streaming of the podcast, specifically Facebook Live audio. Do you have any idea how we'll be able to feed the mix from the audio interface to a mobile phone tablet, considering that the latter will have a TRRS connection? I believe my U24 has left and right 1/4 inch outs. Our goal is to have a main recording be uploaded on SoundCloud and a live streaming for Facebook Live audio. Thanks. Okay, good question, Hans. So here is the Zoom U24. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's sort of it's interesting. It's kind of the same form factor as their H series recorders, like the H6, but it's made specifically as an audio interface. So what you have here, Hans, you actually have some outputs. You have some unbalanced RCA outputs, and you have 1/4 inch outputs. And I assume these are balanced. Yeah, they say balance. No, that's balance. That has to do with the outputs. Oh, that's for the headphones. Okay, this is like a pan. Anyway, so I think what you're going to be using is you're going to probably be using these here, the RCA outputs, which is an unbalanced output. And then you could get a cable that's something like this. We have TRRS on one side, and then we have left and right here. Now, I don't know that the left and right is really important necessarily in this case. You have to keep in mind that for mobile devices, as far as I understand, the 3.5 millimeter inputs on mobile devices are generally always mono inputs. So they just take one channel of audio in and 2 channels out. So 2 channels of left-right stereo for listening on headphones, and then single mono microphone input. So stereo is not going to be important to you. Your phone is a limiting factor if you were hoping to do stereo. Not a big deal if you're just talking. I don't think that's a limiting factor, but a cable like this may be able to do the job for you. You may want something a little longer, but this is the idea. I'll leave a link for this down below. I don't know exactly how these are wired, so you may have to experiment a little bit. In as much as possible, I'd recommend getting these ahead of time, testing and making sure it all works so that you have time to recover if this doesn't work. But that's probably the first thing I would try on that. You may also need to look, I don't know what the output is on the Zoom. I assume it's consumer line level, and you may have to control the output level. And I don't know how that works on the U24 in particular. So you may actually need an attenuation cable. So you're going to have to, take do a little bit of research. I don't know if, I don't think you're going to need an attenuation cable, but I think you can control the output level on these. I don't know exactly how. I think this balance may be part of it here. I mean, that would just be essentially fading it. So anyway, I apologize. I don't know all the answers for this particular case, but that's what I would try, is getting that cable that we showed here, giving that a try, and see where you get. And hopefully you have enough time to turn that around. If you need to go somewhere local, sometimes places, I don't know if you're in the U.S. I don't know if you're in the U.S. If you are, Guitar Center is a kind of a hardware gear store for mostly musicians, but they also have a lot of cables, and you may be able to find something like that there, so you can turn it around quickly if you find it doesn't work, and you can potentially find another solution. So, all right, those are the questions we had for today. Again, the MixPre 6 review will be coming this next week, hopefully over on the main Curtis Judd channel. Also coming up, I just talked to my contact over at B&H Photo earlier today, had a very good conversation with him, and one of the things we decided to do coming up here before too long is we're going to look at some more near-field monitors for mixing and post-processing your sound. He had some interesting insights, and it rings true to me. And that is that when you're setting up your overall audio kit, the best places to invest your money for long-term investments, an investment that may be a little bit more expensive, but that will last you longer, is at the ends of the signal chain, of the audio signal chain. So that's going to be microphones, and that's going to be monitors or headphones. And so we're going to be taking a look at some more monitors. I don't know if not all of you have seen this, but I did do a kind of a comparison of various monitors about a year ago, and we're going to do an updated version on that. In that previous piece, the monitors that I really enjoyed the most were called the Focal, or Focal, I don't know how you say it. It's a French company, and the name of the monitor was a CMS40. It's actually a very small, they're small monitors, and the woofer was a 4-inch woofer, so it's a relatively small woofer as well. But those had they had something about them that was interesting. They sounded, they had much less distortion. So what that means in practical terms is that you could hear the individual high frequency differences a lot better. I guess the different sound sources, particularly when you're mixing. So if you had music and you had dialogue, you could hear all the nuances of those two sound sources very clearly, much more clearly than you can on a lot of the other monitors that I tested. So they were, somewhat expensive, I guess, depending on your perspective, but they were really kind of eye-opening or ear-opening to me. So anyway, we're going to have another look at those. Focal's actually, I think, discontinued the CMS line, which at first I was kind of disappointed in, because I wanted to look at the next model up. Instead of the 4-inch woofer, I wanted to look at the 6.5-inch woofer model. But my rep told me today, no, they've discontinued those. We have some in stock. So what he's going to do is send a set of those out to me, the CMS 65s, I guess they call them. And then also the new line that they've replaced that with, he's going to send one of those out as well. I believe that's called the Shape 65. Again, also from Focal. So I'm really looking forward to comparing those a little bit more and talking about, one of the things I'm hoping to talk about a little bit more is, one of the things I think that we all struggle with is, okay, most of us are working with very limited budgets. And the question is where do we invest our money for the most, to get the most bang for our buck? And I'm hoping to talk a little bit more about that, because after having spent thousands and thousands of dollars on all the gear that I have, I've learned some things about what I think makes the biggest difference. And I think that having good monitors, I think at this point, the monitors that I'm using are kind of holding me back, especially once we did this piece last week where we looked at all the different headphones ranging from low end to high end. There is a significant difference in those high end headphones in terms of what you can hear and being able to identify the potential issues in your entire audio signal chain. You're able to be able to identify those issues and potentially fix them. So having high quality monitors is really, really helpful. Anyway, I'm getting on the soapbox. I think is a good place to stop. Thanks everyone for your questions this week. Hope everyone's having a great time in their recording projects, making some great audio recordings, and we'll talk to you again next week.